Are you looking for a way to advertise your business, offer discounts to your customers, and help veterans at the same time? Then citybyhero.com is the answer. It's your shop local program helping you while providing jobs and funds for veterans. It's simple to sign up, easy for your clients to find your business and your offers, and there are many plans to choose from that fit your budget and your needs. Go to citybyhero.com and sign up today, and we'll make a donation for you to a veterans organization. citybyhero.com.
And now, it's time to Stand for Truth with the host of Stand for Truth Radio, Susan Knowles.
And welcome to the program, everyone. I'm your host, Susan Knowles. Please check out my website at susanknowles.com and find out all about the ways you can follow Stand for Truth Radio and other shows I do, such as Knowles on the News, Talk It Out, God's Views on Political News, and Veterans Voice of America. So just go to my website. You'll find all the information there. And finally, follow me on Twitter at Susan Knowles. Now, my guest today is LEE STRANAHAN. LEE STRANAHAN is a pioneer in digital media who has over 25 years of experience in broadcast production, education, and independent media as a producer, director, and teacher. He's been a contributing writer and reporter for two of the top news sites in the world, the liberal The Huffington Post and the conservative Breitbart News. CNN called LEE an internet sensation. He's produced viral videos for companies like Barely Political, Brave New Films, and Breitbart LLC. So let's welcome to the show LEE STRANAHAN. LEE, how are you?
I'm great, Susan. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here. Now, last time you were on, you had just left Breitbart, and you're back again, and you've just left Breitbart. So tell us, if you will, a little bit about why you left and what you're doing.
Sure. So just in a big picture sense, as a journalist, right? So let's get this clear up front. Journalism is a very bad profession. If you're a journalist right now, you may have noticed this. A lot of people don't like journalists right now, and I'm one of them. The media is horrible. There's no question about it. The media is awful, right. And so to me, if you're going to go into the profession, if you're going to do it, and the pay is bad, and you work all the time because the news cycle never ends, and so on and so forth, right? So
right.
The only reason I'm doing it, because I didn't have to, I had another career where I worked in TV and film for a long time. The only reason I'm doing it is to work on big stories that I think are important and get them right. So I'm trying to do something that I think the media is very bad at, which is telling the truth and connecting the dots on stories, right? So anytime, that's the way I see my career. So I don't see my career as like a string of jobs. I see it as a string of stories. And therefore, anytime I'm in a place where my job is conflicting with the ability to tell big stories, I'll quit the job. It's not even a choice for me. It's not hard at all. So the first time I quit Breitbart was, and you got to remember, so before I ever met Andrew, I was writing for the Huffington Post. I used to be on the left, and I was writing for the Huffington Post. And when I met Andrew and started working on the Pigford story, I literally began to lose my entire audience. Like everybody who liked me and read me and all the work that I had. When I was working with Andrew, they were like, well, gee, we don't like you anymore. And then when the Huffington Post treated Andrew badly, and what they did was it was my suggestion. So I met Andrew. I'm writing for the Huffington Post. We're working on the Pigford story, big story about fraud. I was a Democrat at the time. I didn't think fraud was controversial. I thought everyone would be opposed to fraud, right?
Right.
So, and I quickly found out that wasn't the case. And I'd worked on other stories before where I'd gone against the grain, like the John Edwards affair story. And so then I suggested to Andrew that he do some writing for the Huffington Post. Why did I do that? Well, so it was his idea. The Huffington Post was his idea when he worked for Arianna Huffington. So a lot of people don't remember that or don't know that, but it was Andrew's idea. And one of my big goals as a journalist is to not just preach to the choir. In other words, I'm trying to get to something that's more universal and that people can agree on generally. Like fraud is bad, let's say. Fraud is bad. Government waste is bad. I think people can agree on that, right? I don't think that should be partisan.
Right,
and
so far.
Yeah. No, right. Yeah, and it is, unfortunately, it is. And so I suggested to Andrew he write for the Huffington Post. People at the Huffington Post completely freaked out, and then they said he can't be on the front page anymore. And so I quit the Huffington Post. And so that was a principled stand for me, which is, look, if you're going to censor somebody based on their ideas, I don't want to write for you. And by the way, I mean, on a side note, it's why I'm not even thrilled with what Glenn Beck did with Tommy Lahren recently, which is basically when they're young, which is the other issue, especially when they're young, because people change. That's the reality is people change, and whatever. So I don't really agree with ideological disagreements as a basis for firing somebody. That's what they did to Andrew effectively. They refused to put him on the front page, so I quit. So in 2013, when I saw what was happening in the Middle East and Syria, and it wasn't being reported on here, I had a chance to go over there. Breitbart didn't want me to go, so it was an easy no-brainer. I quit. Now, in this case, I've been in. I was here for the inauguration. I came out to D.C. for the inauguration to cover the protest. And then I was here for the Women's March, which was the big march that happened the day after. And nobody thought the march was going to be as big as it was. That Women's March was like 750,000 people. It was insane how many people there were. And it was 400 groups. And I immediately realized that the 2020 election started the day after the inauguration, that the left, the Democrats, are very organized. They're very motivated, okay, because that was a lot of people. And they're very angry. And that I wanted to just kind of spend time with my family and chill out after the election. It was, 9 months on the road. So I talked to my wife and I said, I think I need to be in Washington now. And we talked it over and she agreed with what I was saying. And that was the decision I came to, and she agreed with it. So I came out here and I've been covering the White House for a couple of months. And I had to spend a lot of my own money and time. I didn't ask Breitbart, hey, do you want to pay for me to move to Washington? Hey, do you want to buy me clothes or whatever? I just did it.
Right.
And then I talked to them and I said, I want to go to the White House. They arranged for me to get into the White House. And then suddenly, for reasons that were never explained to me in any way that made sense, they didn't want me to go to the White House. And I'm like, okay, but I want to, but I'm going to. I just was like, okay, I'm going to. And so and I told them, I said, I'm going to go to the White House. The only question is whether I do it for you or not. I said, I'm fine with doing it for you. And I've been doing other stuff with them. Like I've been hosting the radio show since I've been in Washington. And I'm very good at hosting the radio show. I had very, very good comments from the people at the station and everything. And so it started to get weird. It started to get weird at the company with stuff like that. And it got weird with one person in particular who also hosted the radio show and wouldn't be doing it as much. And I'm not going to say who they are, but people can figure it out potentially if they heard me. But here's the thing. I personally like this guy. And so it's not personal. It's just, I would never go to another reporter, and even if I was in management, I would never do anything that would be bad for that reporter, as if it were bad for the company. And I had done nothing wrong. I had done nothing inappropriate. I'd done nothing wrong. I looked good when I was in the White House. I had cogent questions, and I was just nothing. I'd done nothing wrong. And so it was an easy decision for me. It was like, okay, well, you can't go to the White House unless you do this. I'm like, well, okay, bye. And I tried to work it out with him. I really tried to work it out with him by being very clear about what I would and wouldn't do and what I was interested in and what I thought was best for the company. And I wasn't getting anywhere. But, I've been at the company like 7 years, and I've never had a promotion once. I'm still a reporter. I have no editorial role at the company whatsoever. And I have an editorial background. I've done editing. I've done magazine editing. I know how to assign stories. I know how to do it. I know how to do all the aspects of editorial. And I'm good at it. And when I saw the promotion that they gave to other people, and I'll just use Milo as an example, that was another thing that in the past few months has been baffling to me, quite honestly, because ultimately, and again, this isn't anything personal against Milo or anything like that, but it became just a circus, and that didn't really represent what I think are conservative values. It was bizarre to me, and certainly didn't represent journalism anymore. It had not. The Milo thing, I liked Milo when he was doing journalism.
Right.
And then when it turned into a dress-up show, and where it's just like, oh, look, he's wearing a dress. Oh, he's wearing an Indian costume. Oh, he's wearing this. And they'd run 5 stories on it on the front page. I'm like, I don't know what our priority. I just didn't understand what our priorities were anymore.
Well, but don't you think that part of that is, you're going to the White House, you're on Periscope, you're taking away from what they're trying to do. They could have seen it that way. I'm not saying that was bad what you were doing.
They never said that. They never said that to me. They never said that to me.
Well, and you wonder though, because when you're doing that, when you're writing stories, when you're telling people on Periscope about it, they're not getting it through Breitbart. And so, was that something where it's like, okay, you're giving away the our business here. Not that you were, but I'm saying they could have maybe interpreted it that way or wanted,
No, that's a lot more cogent than anything I got. The explanations I got were which I can't detail. I was given explanations. They just didn't make any sense. There were things that were like literally just making no sense. And I repeatedly, so for instance, if they had said, hey, the Periscopes are, look, here's what I would have, because I say I've been in editorial before. What they could have done too, let's say they felt that way. They could have said, hey, why don't you do Periscopes or Breitbart? Why don't you do some videos? I'd actually talked to them about doing video stuff from the White House, where sort of a higher quality thing, or doing reports. Not the same thing I do on Periscope. It's a different format, but something. I had talked to them about stuff like that. I'd said, look, we're really underutilizing what we could be doing here. But based on what I heard, that would have freaked people out more. Based on what I've heard, that would have been worse. And so literally I was getting limited as to what I could do. And because, as I say, I'm not an editor, I made a list at one point of at least 15 different major stories that have been killed or suppressed or not supported when I was at Breitbart. I made that list to show in a meeting that I had with somebody, with a couple of top management people. And I said, do you see how weird this is, that I couldn't do these stories with you guys? Because you didn't get them or you wouldn't, whatever. And I said, they're all right. They're all accurate. One simple example, that's the Steubenville rape case story. That's the story I covered, okay? And they were initially supportive. They sent me out there, and then immediately they pulled back because rape cases are controversial. And so then I started to spend my own money and my own time to work in the story, and I started to blog on it on the side. Now, later, even Gawker had to admit that I was the only reporter who got that story right. They had to admit that me and John Ziegler got it right too. But everybody else, the New York Times, Deadspin, et cetera, they all got it wrong. Now, when Gawker has to come out and admit, okay, well, Stranahan got the story right, even though he's a Breitbart reporter. That's what I mean by, like, it's kind of objective. It's just like, it's factually provable that I got that story right. And it was a big story. It was so big that when the verdict came in the Steubenville rape case, CNN broke into their coverage to show the verdict live. That's how big that story was.
Yeah.
And so I saw that coming, and I could name, like you say, a dozen, the Beirut thing that I mentioned before, ISIS and the Syrian refugee crisis I was reporting about in 2013. And I would have these discussions with the company and say, look, guys, I know you don't see how I do it, but do you understand that every time we're at loggerheads on a story, I'm always right, and it's always big. Do you see that? And they had a similar thing with Andrew, where Andrew Breitbart, despite the fact it was his company, a lot of people inside the company didn't really support Andrew and the Pigford story. That's why he brought me in part. People thought he was nuts. People who aren't at the company anymore. And they thought he was nuts on it. Like, they would say to me, yeah, this is Andrew's obsession. Well, we proved that story. The New York Times later said, yeah, Andrew Breitbart and Lee got it right. They admitted that we got it right. But when you do reporting that goes against the news cycle,
right,
it's very hard to get people to believe in you. And at a certain point, you'd think you'd go like, look, I have a pretty good track record here, but it was very, very hard. So,
well, but sometimes I see you as a serious journalist, and I'm not saying that other people aren't, but I don't see the caliber of journalists that we used to see. And I think, honestly, you're from sort of and this is not an insult at all, you're from the old school way of doing things like Breitbart did. And I think from on the outside looking in, the Breitbart that I see today is not the old Breitbart. And I think, perhaps you don't fit into their mold today, and that went against you. And that's a good thing for me.
Well, Well, let me tell you, though, I mean, in defense of the people at Breitbart, there are people over there. The stuff Brandon's doing on the border, the stuff that Susan Berry's doing on education and life issues, the stuff that Michael Patrick Leahy's doing on immigration stuff and the issue of disease as part of the refugee program. I could name other people, but let's just that's a good. Raheem Kassam is a serious journalist. I could go on, right? The problem is, when was the last time you saw Susan? Here's a simple example. When was the last time you saw 3 stories on the front page about what homeschoolers are facing? Because I homeschool. Susan knows a lot about homeschooling and is passionate on the issue, right?
Right.
So this is what was irritating to me, is there'd be 5 pictures of Milo in a dress.
Yep.
But if we were trying to get something that was, I think that the Breitbart, here's my other irritation with it. I think the Breitbart readership, in fact, would be more interested in homeschooling and school choice issues than Milo in a dress. I didn't understand who they thought the audience was. Now, for some publications, that wouldn't be true. But I actually think that the average Breitbart reader is closer to me. I think it's middle-aged people with kids and lives. Does that make sense? I think that's who the average reader is. And most of the editors at Breitbart are unmarried, no kids, late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, the millennials.
That's right. Not knocking them.
Right.
Whatever. We need that. But when I'm a person who's got 5 kids at home and I've lived a pretty full life, with ups and downs and whatever, right? Problems and everything else. And I'm
experience.
Yeah. I think that makes a difference when it comes to certain things of journalism. But I think more importantly, it does make a difference when it comes to certain things at an editorial level. Because don't forget, and this is the thing to understand, as a writer at any big publication, I do not get to determine what goes up. My work has to go through a gauntlet of editors.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And even the work I cover in general, I have to pitch before they do it. And so I'd seen this ever since Steve Bannon left. Just like when Andrew left, there was a lag period the company wasn't as good for a while. When Steve left, it's a noticeable loss. And again, Steve's a guy with a tremendous amount of life experience. You know what I mean? Like three different industries and stuff like that. And so it became difficult. And so it just became difficult. And then when this happened and it was like, let me go out and try to do it. And I really tried to, and I had conversations with him repeatedly. And I'm like, look, I think you're not taking advantage of me. You could take advantage of me. You'd make more money and you'd serve your readership better. But I'll tell you, when you're outvoted with people who are like, no, they think they know what's going on. So it's not they have really good writers over there. They have plenty of really good writers over there. And it's not that the editors are bad people or anything like that, but they just don't know what they don't know.
Well, but you're having people who are today, and Breitbart's not the only one. It sounds like there are other websites, other news stations that they cater to millennials, and they think that the way to do news today is to give the millennials what they want, because the millennials are, quote unquote, the future. But the millennials aren't the ones really listening that intently to the news. They're not the ones that are spending money, but that's not how people see it. So Breitbart's not alone in that. And I think it's doing a disservice to the majority of the people in America. I really do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I wanted to tell you, we're talking about.
Yeah, it's.
Go ahead.
It's. No. What you just said, it's a problem across the spectrum.
Yeah.
With conservative news sites. I've had other people talk to me about it. Just in general, this is a problem, and there's not much you can do about it. So,
yeah, and for example, we were talking about this type of news and what people want. What people want is kind of give me something quick. Let's do clickbait type thing, and they're not so concerned about fake news. I don't know if you saw over the weekend, a CNN analyst. Her name is Juliette Kayyem, Kayyem. Who came out and she was saying, she was in an interview. This was a panel interview on CNN. And she was talking about Flynn. And she's saying, oh, you know what? I've just gotten news from sources and from sources I've heard as well that are talking about it, that Flynn has cut a deal with the FBI and he's going to be flipping on Donald Trump about this whole Russia thing. And she tweets all of this out and she says it on CNN. And like the very next day, she's saying on Facebook, oh, but wait, I didn't say that I had confirmation, and I didn't say that this was actually happening. I'm saying, as somebody with years of experience in the national security system, this is what I'm thinking is going to happen. But she made it real news in the beginning.
Well, look, generally speaking, ever since I've been doing journalism, which is really, like I said, it's a second career for me. It's the second major career for me. I've had, other minor ones, but this is the second major career. I worked in TV and film, and I've been doing journalism for about 8 years. I think every single day about the problems in journalism and how to fix them. Every single day. And this is one of the reasons Andrew and I got along very well immediately. because he also thought deeply about what's wrong with journalism. So when a guy like Steve Bannon says the media is the opposition party, okay, he's right, okay? He's right.
Mm-hmm.
And, but, okay, so we said that. Now what do you do about it? Okay, so that's one thing. So now what do you do about it? And so a lot of what I've been trying to do, and by the way, this goes back as long as I've been reporting. This goes back when I was at the Huffington Post. It's not an ideological issue, even in a weird way. It was strange to me that the Edwards story, I was the only reporter on the left who was talking about it, rounded off, but I really was. I was one of the only reporters on the left talking about it. And even then I saw that if it had been a Republican they'd caught, it would have been completely different. They would have been on that story day after day after day after day after day, but they didn't want to touch it. Now, that's an ideological issue. But there's other issues: laziness, resources, advertisers. Let me talk about a big problem on the right now, okay? Because there is a big problem. Funders, okay? Because journalism is not seen as I'm just reading, a story just came over this morning. Breitbart was denied a permanent press credential, okay? Part of the reason they're denied a permanent press credential is because of their connection to the Mercers, who are these big funders. And I don't know anything. I've never dealt with the Mercers, don't know anything about it, but that's what stopped them from doing it, okay? But so why are the Mercers involved? Why? And by the way, this is all over right-wing media. It's all over a lot of left-wing media, too. Let's take Democracy Now! On the left as an example. They're funded by George Soros, okay?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So what that means is, and so I'm going to make this about both the left and the right for a second to see it's the same problem. Do you think if Democracy Now! Wanted to do a story that was against what George Soros wanted, they'd be able to do it? No. Do you think if Breitbart wanted to do a story that was an expose of the Mercers, they'd be able to do it? No. Okay? Now, I'm not equating the Mercers and George Soros, but I'm just saying when you're dependent on funding from a big outside source, does that make sense? Like, I don't care who the source is.
Right.
You're just inherently limited. George Soros is a zillion times worse than the Mercers. So I just want to make it clear. I'm not saying I don't think the Mercers are bad, even, right?
Right.
I'm just saying it's limiting, right? If I get all of my money from McDonald's, I can't do an expose on McDonald's. I can't, right? I just can't do it. And so that's not an ideological issue. It's a systemic issue that's based on something else. It's based on patronage. And it's a big problem, right? And it's a big problem all over the place. And so when the Koch brothers were funding a lot of the stuff, and they're doing it less, but they still do, a lot of people had to toe the Koch brothers line on certain issues: immigration, criminal justice reform. The Kochs are more libertarian. They're just as libertarian, if not more libertarian than they could be conservative in a lot of ways. So they were funding a lot of stuff that was libertarian, and that was kind of at odds with some people. So it limits who you're going to get your funding from. And that kind of thing, boy, it's a real problem. And when you add that into all the other problems, journalism as a whole just is a mess right now. It's a real mess. And like I say, that's the stuff I think about every day. What we face on the right is that we're outnumbered. And so if the media is the opposition party, as Steve Bannon said, we have to realize that we're the colonists and they're the redcoats. And you don't face the redcoats by doing what the redcoats do, which is they would have huge battalions of people. They very disciplined in the Revolutionary War. And the way the rebels beat them was by picking them off from the woods. Does that make sense? Like They would be in the woods and they'd pick them up. You have to fight asymmetrical warfare. You cannot just go into the battlefield because you're heavily outnumbered and you'll lose, period. That's what will happen. You will lose. So we try to fight it like symmetrical warfare sometimes, and it doesn't work. So you need to be a little more strategic and a little more thoughtful. And this is where I think being older and more experienced about the world helps. Because when I talk to people who are more my age, not 30, they get that. They get that.
Well, and I think it's one of those things that's difficult, again, because there are so many people who they're starving for the truth, and they really want the truth. But when they turn on the TV, they have people who don't have the life experience, don't have the knowledge, and sometimes are just reading what's handed to them, and that's not journalism. And I see that a lot. I mean, I see where people want to just, on Twitter, it's so easy just to put something out there without first looking to see if it's actually real. Is this a real news source? Is the story even real? And we've gotten so used to that. And I just think that we have a real problem. We really do. And I think people like you, Lee, should start your own network. Let me just say that, okay? Because you need to have people who are your age with your life experience who are out there giving people the truth. We can't lose that.
Well, so that gets back to the problem of funding. Right? So that gets exactly back to the problem of funding. So then, starting a business like that is no small proposition. It's and you can't. You can start. I could start a blog for nothing. I have a blog, but then getting readership and then building a professional organization and everything else. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That requires money. And then where does that money come from? And then what do they want? And again, I don't care what your ideology is. This is always going to be the problem. It's very difficult to maintain independence in that environment. But it's also just very difficult to run it down. It's just very difficult to find someone who'll write you a check for $100,000 or $1 million or $10 million. You know what I mean? It's just very difficult.
Well, it is. And I know somebody else, and I won't mention his name because, he would be your competition, but he put maybe like $100,000 towards a business, a network himself. And then he actually asked the public for donations, if you will, and then kind of looking at it more as an investment. And they actually gave $250,000 for that.
Yeah. So it's nice to have that 100,000, I assume, to start with. You know what I mean?
I know.
So I just quit my job, and therefore rent is due on like Monday. So that's what I'm thinking about is literally like, how can I get the $1,500 I need to pay rent? That's literally what I'm.
No, I know.
Literally, and I don't sweat it. It's for two reasons. Number one, it's part of why I came to Christ. To be honest with you.
Yep.
That's part of why I came to Christ. I've experienced enough stuff that happens providentially. I guess I would have called it coincidentally a few years ago. Right. But at a certain point, you just go, there's something bigger going on here. You know what I mean? And so,
absolutely.
And so that's part of it for me. And I really don't worry about it. I really don't. I mean, but the other thing I believe is, I believe God wants you to worry about it a little bit. I believe God isn't. I believe I was just like, I'm not going to worry about it, and then I go take a nap for the next 3 weeks. God, I'm not sure God would be thrilled on that part. So you got to, you got to take action. You got to pray. You got to do things.
Right.
But when that happens over and over and over again, I've seen things in my life that I could not have predicted or planned.
Yep.
That have happened over and over and over again. So there's that. But yeah. So I'm at a point where literally it's like, okay, how do I get through to rent next week? You know what I mean? Like
I do.
That's
but
more my focus.
I think it's important too, because when you're doing what you do, and meaning that, as I've watched you over the years and what you do, I think you literally try to give people the truth. And as you said, sometimes they don't like it, they don't appreciate it. But while you're giving them the truth, it's not only that you're doing it for people here on this earth, but you're doing it for God as well. And I do think blessings come out of that. And I think that's why over time you've been able to quit Breitbart, keep going, and keep finding new paths for yourself because you're doing the right thing. And I wish everybody else were doing that same thing too, instead of just trying to figure out, oh, how do I get people to give me money? How do I get people to click on my article? You know, I mean,
or even just or even just Twitter followers. There's the 60 Minutes did that story last night on fake news. I don't know if you saw that, but it was a pretty good segment. It admitted that there's fake news on the left and right. It admitted, shockingly, and they shocked the people there, that the people who, and I know why this is, 60 Minutes doesn't know why it is, but I know why it is. What they were shocked by is that the people who fall for fake news on the left are more educated, right? Mm-hmm. That was interesting. In other words, people like to think fake news is just for dumb people, right?
Right.
And it's not. It's not. Fake news is the reason that happens more on the left is they're more ideologically indoctrinated the more education they've had. If you have a master's or a doctorate, you've probably been marinating in left-wing ideology, particularly if you're at an Ivy League school or something like that. You've been marinating in leftist ideology for like 6 to 8 years, right? So, whereas a regular working class Democrat, just somebody who, they grew up in Michigan, they grew up in Pennsylvania, they're from a union family, and they've always voted Democrat. That's who they vote for. That person are the people who voted for Trump in the last election, right? That's who voted for Trump, because they see what's happening to the country, and they hear these arguments about Islam and transgender bathrooms and everything else, and they just go, this doesn't, like what? Like, it doesn't make any sense to them. And they see the contradictions of it. They're like, well, why are you promoting Islam and gay rights at the same time? Don't you see that that's kind of a contradiction? Because they look at it and they just go, well, yeah, the Muslims don't seem to like the gay people very much as they throw them off buildings or hang them. And so that sort of common sense is what you lose when you go into academia. But anyway, that's
right.
60 Minutes piece. It was pretty balanced, actually. And but I know plenty of people who watch that and are like, oh, it was bad. My whole thing is I'm very critical of CBS. I'm critical of the mainstream media. No, I don't know anybody who's more authentically critical than I am. But we have to work harder on the right. What that means is that because it's asymmetrical warfare and because we're a minority, we have to work harder. And we have to have higher standards. And that's what Andrew Breitbart thought. I mean, period. He used to say that, chapter and verse. Andrew used to say that. We need to work harder. And boy, that seems to have been lost in this last election cycle to some people who are just, they're convinced if they've got a lot of Twitter followers, it somehow means that they have more value in the world or something. It's bizarre to me. But I notice a lot of them aren't spiritual, though. I will say that. A lot of them, they don't have any spiritual, scriptural, Judeo-Christian foundation whatsoever. Does that make sense? Like, that's one thing I've noticed consistently.
Yes.
So.
No, and it's, everything on social media today, not everything, but a lot, seems to be based upon how many people that you can get to follow you, whether you're sitting there with a MAGA hat on with cool sunglasses. I mean, that seems to be the norm these days. And that's not what I want for news. That's not who I want telling me, me to rely on them and telling me the truth, because I'm not getting it from them. I'm getting a show. I don't want a show. I want the truth.
Yeah, and it's difficult. And if you look at it any given day, it can be depressing. But I think the trend is towards, here's what I see. I see most of the country, and I really believe this, actually wants the truth. And if you present it to them, just say, look, why don't we give you both sides? Why don't we just tell you, without saying Chuck Schumer's a libtard right?
Right.
Let me just tell you what he thinks. Let me tell you what he said, and then let me tell you what Mark Meadows said, and then you can make up your own mind. Here's what they actually said, and let me not try to misrepresent the position, but just present it to you fairly. When I talk to people, Democrat, Republican, left or right, most people are desperate for that right now, and nobody's giving it to them. And one of the sad things about the Breitbart situation to me is they had a potential after the election to lean into solid journalism.
Yes, I agree with that.
And because all eyes were on them, right? And they had the potential to lean into it and to say, you know what, we're going to double down on what made us popular in the first place, our DNA, which is real journalism. Right now, there's nobody at Breitbart. I can just tell you this because I was the last person there to really cover the institutional left in depth. Okay.
Wow.
Brandon, who knows a lot about the left, does border stuff now. Okay. And a few other people, Aaron Klein knows the left pretty well, but he covers Israel stuff mostly, right? So my beat, I was the only person left whose main thing they covered was the institutional left, and I'm gone now. And with me being gone goes everything in my head, right? So they have everything I've written, but just the fact that I can look at a story and it's gone. And they don't care. I can tell you when I turned in my resignation, there was no effort to keep me. There was no no, please don't go. I don't think Steve Bannon would be happy about that. I can just tell you. I think Steve Bannon would want me at Breitbart. I also am confident that Andrew would absolutely want me at Breitbart. And that's one of the reasons I stayed for so long, is out of loyalty to Andrew, even though it wasn't fun and it wasn't fun and it wasn't fun for my family. And, but I have a loyalty to what Andrew did. Then when Bannon was there, Bannon's a visionary guy, and it was great to work and watch him work and stuff like that. But that's a lot of that's just gone now, and it's unfortunate. And they didn't seem to. There was no effort to. I'm convinced there was a lot more struggle with Milo leaving than there was with me leaving. And in a numbers perspective, I guess, I get it. I guess. I don't know.
Well, it is a business, and they're looking at it as who gives us more clicks, who brings us more income, that type of thing. And there's got to be a balance because it's when people like you leave and when Steve's no longer there and when Breitbart, Andrew's no longer there, that's the integrity that we all used to rely upon that is no longer there. I'm not saying that people at Breitbart or anywhere else aren't trustworthy, but it's the integrity, right. That now is gone, and we're into headlines, we're into millennial stories, we're into shock type stories like millennials of follow Milo, and it's not. I don't think it's what the majority of Americans are looking for, and what they sign on for. And I can tell you one thing. I see a lot of people retweeting stuff on Twitter and other places, and Breitbart isn't usually one of them that they do that frequently. So
well, and I would argue too, and I did argue. Not only would I, but I did when I was at the company. Look, did Milo bring a lot of clicks and attention? Yes, but here's the thing, right? I could get a lot of attention today, Susan. I could make headlines and clicks tomorrow. Here's all I have to do. I'm 2 blocks from the White House. I could strip naked and I could run over and jump over the fence. Okay? And I could paint a big picture of Steve Bannon on my belly. Okay? Now, if I were to do that, I would trust me. I'm not going to. But I would get all kinds of headlines. I'd be in the paper for days.
Yes.
Right?
Right. You would
absolutely be in the paper for days. Now, would that help my reputation as a journalist?
No.
By the way, I'll bet a lot more people would follow me on Twitter. I'll bet my Twitter following would double overnight.
I would bet you, yes.
Yeah, right. And especially if I said, I'm going to keep doing it, right? So I said, well, they can stop me today, but, there's 7 days in a week. So I would get so many follows and I'd get all kinds of attention. So now, what have I just done to my reputation as a human being journalist? I've ruined it, right? I'm over. I'm now a sideshow laughingstock.
Right.
And my argument has been that when you put 5 pictures of Milo on the front page, that if they had, see, here's what you can tell. Watch the stories that go up in the top section of Breitbart. If a story goes up in the top section of Breitbart with the picture, it gets like 10 times the number of comments as other stories. You can just see it. Just watch. You'll see it. Okay? Now, if you give 5 pictures to something and a whole section devoted to somebody or a story, it will get more clicks and more interest. This is clear, right?
Right.
So, therefore, did Milo create the clicks, or did Breitbart supporting Milo create the clicks? The most clicks he got recently were when people attacked what he did at Berkeley. And that got a lot of clicks, I think, because people are sick of the left attacking Trump supporters, period. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Okay? And so I started to argue, and I said this before the election. I said, do you think that the frog memes, Pepe the Frog, and all this crap, do you think it's helped or hurt? And most people were jumping in and go, no, I think it's helped. And I know that there are people who think that they are why Donald Trump won. Now, they're not. There's no polling data to show why they made a difference. There's nothing. But they have a big social media presence, so they like to take credit for it. My argument is that stuff actually hurts you long term. It actually, yes, you're getting clicks, you're getting views, people are showing up, but you've hurt it. And that's what I'm saying. I think it would have been a better business decision. Not just better, but a better business decision to say, you know what, we're going to really focus. And then see that they had one chance after the election, and then after Milo was gone, they had another chance to go, we are doubling down on journalism. We are going to really focus on this. And they just have not. They have not. Now, they in fairness, they didn't shoot me down on everything. They were open to me doing more stuff at the company. They were open to that. And I don't want to get into the details because I can't. But they were open to that. But ultimately, it wasn't really happening. And I just think there was always going to be problems. And it is bizarre to me because I know what Andrew thought of me, and I know what Andrew thought of my journalism, and I know the resume I have. But sometimes you got to leave home to be appreciated. I don't know how else to put it, but like sometimes people don't appreciate you when they're familiar with you. You know what I mean? Like,
no, I do.
It's a bummer, but
it is a bummer. But I think one of the things too is that people are looking for somebody that they can rely on. A news station that they can rely on. We used to. Some people thought Fox News a long time ago was somebody that you could turn on and know that you were getting fact-based news. There isn't anybody today. There's not a news station. You can't do ABC, NBC, CBS, blah blah blah. None of them are reliable. Even Fox News is very left-leaning these days. So you're getting one-sided, and you're not getting the truth. You're not getting analysis either.
No, what you're getting is a narrative. So this is what I saw when I was at the White House. So I was at a press conference at the East Room that the president gave about a month ago. And the stuff you see when you're in the room is you see the banter, you see the conversations, you hear the laughter at certain jokes. Does that make sense? Like,
yes. This
is the stuff you don't really see just from the press conferences, okay?
Right.
And they're so biased that they don't know how biased they are. They literally laugh at the idea that they're biased. And the reason they laugh at the idea that they're biased is, the analogy I use on this is a fish. So a fish thinks that water is air. In other words, when we look at a fish in a lake, let's say, we go, oh, that fish is stuck in a lake. But to the fish, that lake is its whole world. That's what it sees, right? And so the media is like that. They don't see that their perspective is just their perspective. And the reason they don't is the same way a fish looks around and goes, look, all my friends live here, right? That's the way the media is. The media looks around and everybody they know broadly agrees with them. So, and I'm not even talking about specific issues like abortion or gun rights or whatever. I'm talking about even broader than that. They view most of the country in a certain way. They view people who live in rural America. That's flyover country, right? That's the way they view it. This is one of the reasons we moved up to my wife and I have moved to rural America, because spending time in places like Twin Falls, Idaho, or the Dakotas and stuff like that, I like those areas. I like the people in those areas. But the media, they in many cases moved away from those areas, right? That's where they don't want to be. And if there weren't better opportunities for my family here in the work that I do, that's where I'd be. That's where I'd be. I'd be happier there. In a lot of ways, I'd be happier there. But the media, that's how biased they are. They don't deal with people who, if you're a Washington, D.C. reporter, you probably don't know people who own guns personally, right? You just don't.
It's true. Yeah, you're in a bubble. You are in a bubble, too. They exist in their own little world. It's kind of, other groups are like that, too, but you can see that they, the people I see in the press conferences, they come there with, everybody has almost the same question. And it's probably
that's right.
Been given to them by the top person in the group, whoever the company is or their immediate supervisor. Go in here and ask this, and it's all the same, and it's so predictable. That's one of the reasons I like the Skype questions, because at least you would get a couple of local people on the news that didn't have the same answer or the same question as everybody else, and it was kind of refreshing.
And that's why it was so important for me, and I argued very strenuously that I needed to stay in that room, because you don't get picked on unless you've been in there for a while. They get used to you and they know who you are. Exactly. And so I was just starting to get to the point. And my interest was in doing questions that fought that general narrative. I was not fought it actively. I don't know. I mean, I asked one question of Mick Mulvaney, who's the director of officer management and budget. That's one question I got in that room. And the question was basically about the budget and about NASA. And the question was basically like, you've only dropped it a small amount, but you've also talked about private enterprise. So doesn't this show a commitment on the Trump administration's part to science and NASA? And nobody in that room was going to ask that question. No. Because in their opinion, Republicans hate science, right? If you're a Republican, you hate science, and you're dumb, right? Mm-hmm. And you could never be in favor of that. Sure, liberals can't figure out that an 8-month-old fetus is actually a baby. That's a little science that eludes them. But leave that aside for a second, right? That's science that's trickier for them to figure out. But that's, and I asked that question. That's not a contentious question, okay? But it's completely comparative. It's not that made people go, "What are you doing?" Like it wasn't. I didn't have to call anybody out, but boy, it was counter narrative, and that's the kind of thing I was trying to do in that room constantly. So.
Well, and it's unfortunate. Hopefully you'll get back there soon, and then you can start asking more questions.
I will.
Intellectual ones.
I will. I can tell you, I've already, I have a number of offers right now. So this is why I say, this is the other reason I'm not worried. I have a number of offers right now. I've been doing good work for a long time, and people notice. So.
Well, and where can people find you now if they want to, continue to follow you? Where can we get in touch with you and follow the work you're doing right now before you go on to, get hired by somebody else or whatever you're intending to do?
The easiest way is probably Twitter, Stranahan at Twitter, because I'm yapping there all the time, and I'm doing a lot of Periscopes. I'm going to start doing stuff on YouTube. I can tell you that for sure. I've got a few things I'm going to be publishing with Jim Hoft, the Gateway Pundit, in the next week. I have 6 pieces I'm going to be putting up over there, but Stranahan's the best place to get all that stuff right now until I get my website together. You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, and you'll keep us posted. I know you're on Periscope too, so. Yeah,
I am. And Periscope is a really easy way to for me to do content. It's quicker for me to do a Periscope that takes a half hour than it would be to write 300 words on something.
No, I know.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
I can just yap. So that's I have no problem talking, obviously, so.
Well, and I hope you do some more film, too. I know you did one on YouTube. Can tell people where they can find that and what that's about. We have about 3 minutes left for you to tell us that.
I have a YouTube channel. What's interesting is there's a YouTube channel up that I didn't put up. It's got all my Periscopes on it. And that's somebody who, I don't know who's doing that.
Wow.
It's somebody who I guess is a fan of mine who's just posting all of them. So my regular YouTube channel is my name. The other one says like Breitbart's LEE Stranahan or something like that. But I have stuff up there, and I'm definitely working on film stuff. And that's one thing I might try to do to pay the rent in the next week is try to raise some money quick for some film stuff.
Well, that's good. I hope people go there and see that, because you did one on Benghazi, and they do need to see that. So check that out, and anything else that you have also. Hopefully the next time I have you on, you'll be working and, at a permanent position, right?
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, that would be nice. But like I said, as you said, the best thing ultimately is that, look, I'm more interested in the stories. At the end of the day, any place I can tell the stories, and they'll let me do my work, and they'll trust my journalistic judgment. Any place I can do that is a pretty good deal for me. I just don't like to. I've done this long enough where I know what I know. You know what I mean? So
I know. And you're good at it, and you should be allowed to do your work. And wherever you go, if you're working for somebody else, they need to know that and allow you to do what you do. So, hopefully you'll be able to do that. And I know that you have a meeting to run to, and I thank you so much for coming on today. And we had a little bit of technical difficulties, but we got through. So, again, thank you, LEE Stranahan, for coming on Stand for Truth Radio.
We did, Susan. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, God bless. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that today. We did have a couple of technical difficulties. Hopefully it didn't go in and out too much. I heard just one of it fading in and out a couple of times there. But if you're not following Lee on Periscope, do that. He is probably one of the, I hate to say it like this, but one of a dying breed of people who really want to tell you the truth, that it isn't about making the money off of what he's doing as much it is about getting the truth to you. And, truth does matter. I try to do that on here. I'm not trying to give you a gimmick. I'm trying to give you genuineness. And I think that we are missing that a lot these days. We really want somebody that we can trust, and we want somebody who's going to tell us the truth, and not what we want to hear, but what we need to hear. And sometimes that's really difficult. I hope he continues to do what he does. I'm sure that he will. Please do go to his YouTube channel, though, and look at that short video and tweet it out if you will. I hope that you appreciate what he does. I really do. I hope you appreciate what I do. I try to, along the same lines, like I said, I try to give you what I know that it is that you need to hear. That's important for you and your family and what you're trying to do, and that you're not deceived by anyone. So until next time, God bless you. Thank you so much for being here today. And until next week, when we have another great guest, we'll see you then. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon. See you next week.